Have you ever wondered what it really takes to escape a monster in a tailored suit? What if the man the world admires, the philanthropist, the CEO, the visionary, is also the same man who leaves bruises where no one can see? This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about a woman who turned her silence into a weapon, about a twin sister who turned grief into justice, about what happens when the hunter becomes the prey. And justice doesn't knock. It storms the gates. Marcus Wellington had it all: power, money, control. But behind closed doors, his wife Kesha lived a life of quiet terror. For 8 long years, she endured the unthinkable, until one day she vanished. No warning, no goodbye. Just a trail of blood, an abandoned ring, and a plan so precise it would tear his world apart. This is not a fantasy. This is a life-changing story rooted in the harsh realities so many suffer in silence. And when the woman they thought they broke disappears, they never expect what comes next. If you're drawn to real stories of justice, family secrets, powerful revenge, or undercover lives that flip the script, this is your video. Hit that like button, subscribe for more true life thrillers, and stick around. Because once you know the truth behind her vanishing, you'll never look at power or love the same way again. The morning unfolded like any other, or so it was supposed to. Marcus Wellington, a celebrated tech billionaire revered by peers and feared by rivals, expected the usual apology that came with breakfast: a fresh latte with perfectly steamed milk, a quiet gesture meant to soothe his ego rather than satisfy his taste buds. But instead of the gentle clink of china and the hum of caffeinated peace, he found something far more disturbing. Drops of dark red blood dotted the gleaming marble floor, winding a silent trail that led through the kitchen, past the stainless steel counters, and out toward the heaving garage door. The corridor was empty. The silence was oppressive. His wife of 8 years, was nowhere to be found. In her place, her wedding ring rested on the cold countertop, shimmering under the morning light like a broken promise. There were no apologies waiting, no coffee cup raised in remorse. Only that ring and those sinister droplets. Have you ever been struck by the hollow weight of absence? When something precious disappears and all that's left is a whisper of meaning pulling you into madness? That is precisely the moment our story begins. An empire's CEO left staring into emptiness, not realizing then that what had vanished was more than a person. It was the illusion of control. Because while Marcus stared in disbelief, the circles beneath his eyes darkened and a cold dread consumed him. He had no idea the world he'd meticulously built around him was about to unravel. He didn't know the woman he had terrorized, day in and day out behind the pristine facade of their mansion, had been preparing for this day. That in every shake of her hand, in every forced smile under designer sleeves, there was a plan, and she was already many steps ahead. Imagine knowing someone holds all the power over you, your safety, your reputation, your very identity. Imagine watching them bask in the adoration of the public, confident that money and influence shield them from the truth. Now imagine if that supposedly invincible person suddenly realized they weren't the hunter anymore. They were the prey. This is that story. A man who believed wealth, pride, and a carefully cultivated image made him untouchable. A woman who proved him devastatingly wrong. Before relationships fracture, they whisper. Before trust crumbles, there's often a quiet, persistent erosion. And by the time morning comes and someone vanishes, lives can shift irreversibly. What started as a mundane breakfast expectation became a nightmare that would expose everything Marcus thought he controlled. His wife's disappearance was not a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. He had built an empire of tech miracles and boardroom triumphs. He had built a marriage of appearances, manicured, public, immaculately reported in society magazines. He had never built a truth. When the ring lay on the counter, it was no longer a symbol of unity. It was a warning, a challenge. The question now wasn't just, where is she? But what has she done? And if she vanished with intentionality, why leave the ring and the blood behind? These were more than clues. They were calculated provocations. They weren't just disappearing acts. They were declarations of war. Underneath his polished image, a storm was brewing. She had been erased in plain sight. He was surrounded by luxury, but without her, everything felt shallow and hollow. And as he stood there, shoes tapping on cold marble, his empire felt like a cage he'd spent years perfecting, with the bars made of his own arrogance. I invite you to pause for a moment and consider, if someone you controlled and demeaned could escape, and wasn't just escaping, but outsmarting you, would you catch on too late? Would you be trapped by your own hubris? Because we are about to go back. Back to the gleaming house in Palo Alto, bathed in artificial light, to the pristine kitchen that masked her bruises, to the smile she perfected as her prison uniform. We're going to trace the cracks in his understanding, the pieces she left behind, and the darkness he never imagined would expose his every cruelty. So, if you've ever doubted you had the power to break loose, even when everything seemed to bind you, stay with this story. Trust me, what happens after the vanishing will make you question everything you thought you knew about justice, resilience, and how far someone can go when survival is at stake. Every morning, Kesha Wellington performed a delicate dance one that masked her suffering with grace, beauty, and silence. In a sprawling Palo Alto mansion that gleamed like a billionaire's showcase, she moved as though in a magazine photograph. The kitchen was a stage, gleaming marble, custom cabinetry, scent of imported Colombian coffee beans roasting in Marcus's high-end espresso machine. Financial papers spread wide and urgent lay scattered across the island. Marcus never missed a beat on corporate warfare, his tablet buzzing with hostile takeover updates. But what he didn't realize was that this polished morning ritual hid a secret stage, hers. Behind the designer labels and handcrafted interiors, Kesha's body carried the truth. Bruises faintly stained her forearms, and bruised recall lingered hidden beneath the silk of a blouse she never picked out herself. With each tray she carried, serving his latte or fetching fresh croissants, she was counting her steps, not with anxiety, but calculatingly. 43 paces from the marble island to the safe room. She had counted them yesterday after he threw her against the refrigerator for buying the wrong brand of moisturizer. Her smile was a learned gesture, a practiced calm her prison uniform. She never cried, she never argued, she never resisted, because resistance had consequences that hospital visits couldn't explain. The walls of that mansion were soundproof, brutally effective at hiding every scream. The perfect facade of wealth and nobility, a steel and glass castle where abuse echoed only in silence. Let me pull you even deeper into that morning. Steam curled up from the cup as she placed it gently in front of him. The word darling rolled off his tongue like treacle sweet on the surface, poisonous underneath. Her heart twisted, and yet she said it back with honey. Your coffee, darling. Every syllable was a performance, every gesture precise. Marcus didn't look up. He was already deep in the Henderson deal, his dream acquisition, a biotech firm at the frontier of cancer research. Losing it meant billions slipping away, a public humiliation, a wound to his ego. Her body clenched. She knew that face, that curling of his jaw, her signal to brace for impact. She breathed in and counted again, 43, 42, 41. Then his frustration found her. First, a jab meant to remind her of her place, just a casual grip on the wrist, but enough to make bones groan. Where do you think you're going? His tone was soft as velvet, but heavy as chains. I haven't dismissed you yet. Her throat tightened. He pressed the thumb into the bruise from 2 nights ago, warm, throbbing, perfect reminder of her fragility. You understand, don't you, baby? The pet name made her stomach churn. She nodded, voice lost, heart pumping desperation. He traced the neckline of her silk blouse, lingering over makeup meant to conceal bruises that told a different story. You learn fast, Kesa. No backtalk, no tears. Perfect compliance. His words were lessons dripped in venom. When he pulled her to straddle his chair, forcing compliance yet again, she obeyed. Lying down her hate in every pretend kiss, she performed affection so convincingly that it could fool others but not herself. He released her as if the act had closed a deal, snapping back into his CEO persona. Calm, commanding. Board meeting in 20. She barely moved. He tossed orders about her wardrobe, her schedule. Call the car service. Cancel lunch with your sister. I need you free if things get messy with Henderson. That last phrase cut like glass. Her sister had been the tether to reality for weeks now. 3 phone calls had been the only lifeline that kept her sane. But this morning, she'd obey. The pain of losing any connection felt like betrayal, but she had learned long ago the cost of argument. And then, when his Tesla rolled away from the circular drive, when the supposed peace found in his absence settled into the rooms, she moved. Unsure steps, quiet doors, the closet behind rows of gowns she never chose, behind shoes and fabrics he'd bought for her image, tucked within a hidden safe and artifact he never guessed existed. Inside, the treasures of survival. A burner phone, USB drives cluttered with security footage, and a photograph so potent it could unravel an empire. Kesha lifted it with trembling hands. Marcus, upright and arrogant, posed in front of a security camera, blood thick on his knuckles, her faint silhouette crumpled behind him. He hadn't even flinched. He wanted to record his own victory, but what he had ignited was her revolution, because she had built her own eyes into every room, cameras trained on every wall, every corner, every moment he thought invisible. Slaps, threats, violent eruptions, cataloged, time-stamped. No one would believe her words. But this photograph, this single damning image was more than proof. It was the cornerstone of his downfall, a photograph that she would dispatch to the one person who could wield it for justice. And when she tapped, "It's time, Kendra," 3 words encrypted with history, sisterhood, and lethal promise the trap was set. She saw the Henderson deal crumble across the glow of the tablet screen. Months of negotiations evaporated overnight because some board members flinched. It wasn't just money going down the drain. It was Marcus's pride, his image, his illusion of invincibility. And in that moment, Kesha recognized her opening. Look closely. When power begins to slip, cruelty often escalates. For Marcus, this failure reopened old wounds of expectation. For Kesha, it offered a narrow, jagged escape hatch. The game became one of precision, every move calculated, every gesture weaponized. She didn't flinch when he stormed around the room, throwing weight in every syllable. "The Henderson deal fell through," he murmured, eyes cold. Fingers clenched, white knuckles a silent threat. That biotech firm hadn't just been any deal. It was the crown jewel, the one that would propel him to untouchable heights. Losing it felt like defeat in public. Reflected in his tension was his fear of exposure, and always she bore the brunt. She stood by the kitchen island, footsteps even, heart a slow hammer. Every inch of that kitchen marked training ground for survival. 43 paces between luxury and safety number etched in her muscles, in her mind. She had practiced the route under pressure, recalled it after the screaming, the pain. This morning was no different, only sharper. He advanced, smooth as a shark drawn to blood. The grip on her wrist was designed to remind her, "You belong to me." But Kesha didn't shudder. She let the bones creak, but she did not break. He asked, "Where do you think you're going?" Soft voice, heavy culpability. "I want you where I can see you." He pressed into that bruise from last night, thumb digging a reminder, she containing. She nodded. Everything about his confidence screamed disaster for her, but she had rehearsed this chapter over and over. His free hand danced across her neckline. The silk blouse trembled, not from the cold, but from the memory of violence it concealed. He whispered approval. "You learn so quickly." No backtalk, no tears, perfect compliance. Each adjective was an ownership claim, yet she held her face still, silent, plotting, and then the command kiss him like she meant it. That valley between love and hate, where use becomes performance, became her ally. Her lips pressed against his, the taste of his breath coated in resentment, a trance of rage wrapped in tenderness. He stepped back, breathing shallow. "Board meeting in 20, he said with clinical dominance, gliding from violence to business. She turned away as he exited, but paused when he added, "Cancel lunch with your sister." The instruction detonated through her sister, the one anchor she'd allowed herself. He didn't know it, but that was part of the script. When his Tesla hummed into motion and the house exhaled behind the garage door, Keisha moved. She slid into the private closet wrapped in her luxurious prison. Designer clothes ropes of silk and satin that bound her identity, purchased for public currency. The gowns he thought she adored, the shoes she never chose, all lined shelves. But at the back, she found it. A hidden safe behind an unassuming panel. Safe had everything he never saw coming. A burner phone with history erased, USB drives heavy with footage, and one photograph that burned through its paper, a record of her suffering and his triumph. She lifted it with trembling hands made steady by years of pain. The image glared back. Marcus, hands bloodied, standing victorious over her collapsed body. It was clear in its accusation, brutal in its truth. He'd been so sure, so arrogant he'd posed, like a hunter holding trophies. In that click of discovery, she flicked a switch. Evidence collected in secret behind closed doors would outlive the walls of that mansion. That photograph became her warhead. She dialed a number she knew without stumbling. 3 words slipped into the burner phone. "It's time, Kendra." Just like that, the trap was no longer theoretical. It was live. Because while he thought he held all the power inside loans, boardrooms, hardware, and code, she had the real leverage. She knew where every hidden camera lay, how long the flash of bruises lasted under light. She had mapped the architecture of her prison, recorded the railings that echoed with threats, the patterns of his wrath. She knew that his home was full of witnesses, all silent until she gave them a voice. Behind soft smiles and polished surfaces, she constructed her counters. His empire was built on impressive things: biotech investments, mergers, accolades. Her empire was built on truth, justice, and the knowledge that cruelty, once recorded, cannot stay invisible. And this morning, as the house settled into silence and he focused on boardroom battles, she set her pieces in motion. 3 moves. Move 1. Capture the evidence behind his empire of illusion. Move 2. Reach the one person capable of wielding it, Kendra. Move 3. Let the world see what power looks like when it's forged in truth, not fear. This was no impulsive escape. It was the final exquisite calculation of a woman who spent years living in a gilded cage, knowing every crack, every weakness in the bars. He never saw it coming because he believed his world was impermeable. But she had understood its fragility, and yesterday she laid the first pieces of her siege. Stay with this story, because things are shifting now. The ground is wobbling under his feet, and it's not fear she feels, it's righteousness, and it's contagious. Morning light streamed through the windows of the mansion, but in that hour, everything felt hollow. Marcus Wellington woke with the weight of routine pressing on him. Coffee brewing in the kitchen, the hum of his household staff starting their day, except none of it was true. The house was unnervingly silent. His world, built on precise control, had become a quiet battleground. He wandered through rooms that once held their life together. The master bedroom, her side untouched, cold, shutting him out. The bathroom, her vanity mirror reflecting only him, contorted by unanswered questions. The closet rows of gowns and designer shoes hanging undisturbed, untouched. The only thing missing was her presence. Her side of the bed still made, her perfume absent. It was as though a ghost had bled into the walls, erasing her while she stayed inside. He walked down the hallway, heart thudding in his chest as if trying to escape. His eyes darted for signs. A misplaced scarf, a footprint, any trace of departure. Only the wedding ring on the nightstand, an accusation shimmering in the pale light. His reflection fractured in the bedroom glass, not complete without her. Panic gripped him when he noticed the car's absence. The Tesla he'd started watching leave wasn't in the garage anymore. Her car, another instrument of her confinement, had vanished. More than that, her phone lay shattered on the marble counter, the screen spider-webbed, apps forced shut, location services broken. His technology, his tracking, had been rendered useless. It was as if she'd melted through his digital binds. Blood droplets still trailed from last night, darker, older, but stubbornly present, leading toward the garage, enough to show she had moved under her own power, even after whatever brutality he'd unleashed the night before. Not enough to show her destination, just traces of movement, an unsolved equation. He followed them, each drop raising his pulse, stirring unease he wasn't accustomed to. Every call he made carried a tone of denial. "Where is she? Has she called you?" spoken into the lonely air. When he reached Kendra, the one person he expected to understand, the line crackled with confusion. She hadn't heard from her sister. "You two always talk," he said, voice tight, feigning calm. "Is she with you?" But Kendra didn't know. The silence on her end was thick with disbelief and uncertainty. He forced himself into action. He ordered Jennifer, his assistant, to trace credit card activity, bank accounts, and double-check house security footage. His voice trembled, though he'd never have admitted it. Minutes turned into hours while he scoured hotel registries, ride shares, flight logs, anything that could mark her path. No activity. She was gone, vanished into a void he thought he controlled. Yet as his panic metastasized into rage, Jennifer returned with the news that shattered the final layer of his illusion. "Sir, her credit cards were canceled yesterday, her accounts closed, and someone accessed your private server last night. Several files deleted or downloaded." The phone slipped from his hand, clattering onto the marble. She hadn't just fled. She had dismantled his grip piece by piece. Marcus reeled through rooms, searching for files he didn't download, documents he forgot to safeguard, photographs he never thought she'd find. In his study, the screen was wiped clean. The safe, once he prided himself on its secrecy, was open. Photographs missing, evidence gone. His panic became palpable, visible in his trembling hands, in the shallow rise and fall of his chest. He was unraveling. By evening, he understood the price of underestimating her. She hadn't run away. She'd executed a strategic exodus, and everything he built to cage her had become the instruments of his downfall. Then the first anonymous message arrived, a video clip so raw it made his stomach tighten, his own voice brutal and commanding, demanding compliance. Slaps. She had captured it all, and beneath it, 3 words. Day 1 of your education. Then, have you ever realized too late you underestimated someone? His empire's facade began to fracture. Numbers on his finance dashboards turned red. Contracts were terminating. Social media feeds exploded with pointed commentary, rumor, outrage. He watched as the world turned on him, not in whispers, but in a thunderous roar. He who defined power was now powerless before the storm she had called. 3 days of shock, and the walls of his perfect world shook. More emails came, secure, verified, embossed with damning videos and documents. Financial transfers traced to shell companies, testimonies whispered and uploaded, private surveillance footage from rooms he assumed silent. Evidence of him staring into her fear with pride, evidence of weaponized control disguised as discipline. Jennifer entered his office as if entering a crime scene. Her resignation letter lay on his desk, a searing separation between her silence and the chaos he no longer controlled. "Whatever you think you can explain," she said, voice flat, "don't." She left. The door slammed. Her departure resonated like a verdict. He sat amidst the ruins, for the first time reduced to nothing. No assistant, no board meeting, no glossy articles painting him as a visionary. Just him, alone with the realization that the woman he broke had outsmarted him from within his own walls. Marcus felt as though he were adrift in his own life. Each breath felt heavy, dragged down by uncertainty and dread. He paced the dark hallways of his mansion, the rooms once resonant with opulence now echoing with absence and unanswered questions. Then came a knock-soft administrative, out of place. It was Frank Morrison, the private investigator Marcus had finally agreed to meet, though begrudgingly. What followed would scorch the last traces of denial from his mind. Frank's office smelled faintly of stale coffee and anxiety. The kind of nervous energy only comes when secrets are about to surface. Photos, documents, receipts. Frank laid them out like evidence on a cold, unwelcoming table. And with every image and page, the illusion Marcus had lived under unraveled a little more. He'd always believed his control was total. He monitored her, directed her, framed her existence within walls of wealth. Until now, he'd never considered that she might be documenting him in turn. The first set of images showed Keisha in places Marcus thought she had no purpose or permission to go. Women's shelters, support groups, law offices. Her eyes there weren't beaten down. They blazed. She wasn't the trembling figure in his foyer. She was gathering allies, gathering strength, gathering evidence. Bank statements painted a map of her secret financial life, accounts he'd never authorized, donations to legal funds, payments to places he'd intentionally never researched. Then, as shock would have it, the next picture appeared, a photograph of Kesha sitting across a cafe table from someone who looked exactly like her. The same face, same hair, same mischievous smile, but he knew only one woman in his life. "This is your sister," Frank said quietly. "Kendra Wellington." Her legal name, Kendra Morrison now. She has been living her own life in Houston, practicing law, specializing in domestic violence cases, and she's been in contact with Kesha for years. Marcus felt the world tilt. Every conversation he'd had, every moment he'd thought he understood, that woman's mind, the truth, slipped beneath his assumptions like water through fingers. Sister, a twin, someone he never knew existed. He didn't know whether to feel betrayal, disbelief, or fear. Frank continued, "Your wife's been leading a covert operation." She wasn't just building evidence, she was constructing a public narrative, a legal shield, and a war chest of accountability, all while you thought she was fragile, compliant, invisible. He stared, as though the photos might shift or dissolve. There was Kesha, laughing with her sister in bright lights, her posture free. The Kesha he knew recoiled when touched. The Kesha in these pictures leaned in, confident, absorbed in strategy. More documents. Phone logs, listed calls with domestic violence hotlines, lawyer consultations, emails concurrently drafted, ready to launch. This had been years in the making. Marcus's mouth went dry. He thought he'd known her, but now, suddenly, the woman he married was not the one orchestrating this. The mastermind was someone else, or perhaps both of them, in seamless, terrifying collaboration. With every bruise, every threat, she took a snapshot, Frank said, pointing to images of her injuries, medical records, time-stamped videos of violence. Every lie you told about her being unstable, every excuse you rehearsed, deposited right here. He passed Marcus an image that stopped his heart. Kesha and Kendra standing side by side, arms around each other, a study in mirrored identity. Yet Kendra's eyes were steady, unbowed. She was the head of the spear anchoring the entire operation. You never noticed, Frank continued, voice low, because she wasn't the submissive one. She was silent, strategic. Patient Marcus closed his eyes, trying to find a trace of that Kesha he thought he'd had. All he felt was a vacuum left by 8 years of misreading, misunderstanding, and underplaying her quiet intelligence. When his eyes fluttered open, disbelief flickered across his face. Which one was it? This morning, that woman you saw in the footage. Was that Kesha or Kendra? Frank leaned back, steepling his fingers. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They could have been taking turns, swapping roles, or maybe she was Kendra the entire time, all of it performance one that nearly broke you. It was a revelation that rewrote everything. The smiles he had forced, the apologies he demanded, the fragility he thought he created, maybe none of it was real. He had walled himself off from a woman who had always been plotting his undoing. She played the role he needed her to play until the moment she didn't want to. He looked at the photo again, heart pounding. Two women who shared blood, a vision, a mission. One extinguished, one relentless and alive. Then Frank reached across the table. Marcus, you need a good lawyer. You need to start practicing apologies, because whoever's pulling your strings isn't done yet. As he left Frank's office, every step toward the door felt like walking across shards of glass, his confident stride replaced by the weight of knowing he'd been outplayed. Outside, the world remained oblivious to this secret war, but Marcus felt every wall closing in around him. Behind his shattered image, behind his crumbling fortune, behind the Duchess-like perfection of his home, 2 women had rewritten his fate. Now he could only watch as the endgame began. And that sister, she wasn't just a part of the story. She was the story. The world has a way of silencing a person who speaks the loudest truths. In Kesha's case, the silence wasn't surrender. It was the final note in a symphony of rebellion. Her death, when news finally arrived, felt like the last checkmate in a game Marcus never realized he was losing. 3 days had passed since Kesha disappeared. The house, his fortune, his reputation, all lay in ruins. Then came the call. Houston, a sterile morgue, and Detective Rodriguez's voice heavy with regrets and legalese. She was found in a hotel room, Detective Rodriguez said, voice measured. The air seemed to collapse around Marcus. She was found, but this doesn't mean what he thought. The body was herself, Kesha Wellington. But something about the news felt wrong. Apparent overdose, the detective continued. Combination of pills and alcohol. She'd been there for hours before anyone found her. He stared at the phone as though it had betrayed him. Her name. His name. The quiet inclusion of cause of death. He couldn't summon grief or rage or denial. The only thing he felt was a tremor of fear. The woman he tormented. The one he underestimated. Now she was gone. And he hadn't even known it. The morgue attendant's words echoed behind him. Yes, sir. Dental records confirm identity, fingerprints, everything. It was incontrovertible. She was dead. Yet the woman in the security footage had been vibrant just days before, laughing, confident, plotting. Which one was her? That question chased him through the dim rooms of his mansion, hollow and unanswered. Then Detective Rodriguez offered a detail so cold it clipped his breath. The hotel room was registered under the name Kendra Morrison. Kendra, his sister-in-law, the lawyer, the voice on the burner phone that tore his empire apart. The name he had finally come to fear, but the body verified as Keisha Wellington was the legal wife. Then the pieces began clicking. The twin sisters, one alive, one silent, one furious. The name switch wasn't an accident. It was a final illusion, one that saved the sister, orchestrating the dismantling of his life carefully, one that ended the life of the person trapped by his cruelty. He felt shock morph into clarity. Kendra's voice on the phone, cold, precise, "Your wife is dead." No emotion, no flinch. She had watched him crumble, but not one crack of understanding touched her words. "You killed her as surely as if you administered the pills yourself," she said, her tone more indictment than accusation. 8 years of brutality, and now the final note, death. He couldn't move. A world he'd structured around control of her, control of narratives, control of appearances, collapsed into chaos. The coffins of his shame and guilt started being nailed shut. Then came another text, simple but monumental. "Now you know. But this is just the beginning." It wasn't from a ghost. It was from someone alive, orchestrating the destruction he couldn't yet see fully. It was not regret. It was not sorrow. It was triumph. And for the first time, Marcus saw his punishment wasn't in the law yet. It was in a legacy being constructed from his failures. In the days that followed, Marcus descended into a private nightmare. News broke. Welltech Industries under investigation, investors fleeing, board members distancing themselves. The evidence campaign Kendra had orchestrated videos, documents, financial records, spread across news platforms, social media feeds. The titan of tech crumbled under footage of him dominating, degrading the one person whose voice he had tried to silence. But through it all, Kendra remained anonymous, untouched, unaccused, untarnished. Only her sister had paid the price with her life. In quiet moments, Marcus replayed the final scene. The corpse in the morgue, peaceful, ringless, calm. He wondered, was the ring removed intentionally? A final statement. Even in death, she stripped him of his symbols of ownership. He stared at the image on his mind's wall. Kesha's face, then Kendra's in those surveillance photos. Same smile, same features. 2 lives, 1 mission, 1 dead, 1 alive. And he couldn't tell which one he had truly known. There was no court yet, no verdict. But in the court of public opinion, he was already convicted. His empire unraveling, his identity dismantled, his power rendered shallow. The mansion full of cameras that never recorded his own downfall ironic, unbearable. He stood before the empty rooms of his house, the designer gowns, the stunned staff, the silence, every part of it echoing a single truth. He had underestimated her. He had thought he owned her. Instead, she outplayed him with the one thing he never thought possible. Love turned calculated, vows turned collected evidence, and the ultimate sacrifice used as the keystone in her final move. In the deepest part of his mind, Marcus knew this was no suicide note. It was a killing blow, delivered elegantly through death. The sister who survived had everything he hadn't: courage, patience, justice. As night fell, Marcus found himself whispering into empty halls. Why did you do it? Why did you have to die? But he already knew the answer. She did it because she had no choice, but also because in her disappearance, she found the only form of freedom he could never control. The dawn of a new day in Palo Alto brought no comfort for Marcus Wellington. The sunshine that once glinted off his glass walls now highlighted the fractures in his world. In the quiet aftermath of chaos, he stood in the empty halls of his mansion, surrounded by material perfection that no longer mattered. His empire, once invincible, was collapsing like an edifice built on fear and lies. All around him, consequences were unfolding with devastating speed. Board members he had handpicked were now distancing themselves, issuing statements of concern, careful to never mention his name. Financial partners and clients were retreating. His phone buzzed endlessly with news alerts. Welltech Industries under investigation for domestic abuse, fraud, and misuse of corporate resources. Headlines proclaimed the man unmasked. Tech CEO under scrutiny. philanthropist revealed as predator, a marriage built on a lie. Gone were the boardrooms where Marcus paced with confident stride. Instead, early morning protests had sprouted outside his home voices, demanding accountability, chanting solidarity with victims. Cameras flashed from news crews, gathering shots of his mansion, now a crime scene in reputation, if not in law. From the upstairs windows, he watched helplessly as the world turned against him. Inside, evidence boxes were carted through his estate. Hard drives, phones, photographs, documents, all carefully cataloged by half a dozen agents from federal agencies. They treated the plush carpets and marble surfaces as crime scene material, tracking droplets of blood, digital footprints, and discarded private notes. Marcus, once commanding rooms with his presence, could only stand and watch, ghostly, as the agents documented the violence that had been hidden in plain sight. To the public, his downfall seemed so sudden, but for Kesha and Kendra, it was long in the making. In their silence, they'd built an arsenal of proof. In their absence, they'd let the world see the truth. And now, that truth had become his undoing. His assistant, Jennifer, had already resigned. Her scrawled note on his desk read, "I cannot stay for a world built on violence." It wasn't just loyalty she'd withdrawn. It was credibility, the quiet trust he'd depended on for years to shroud his dark side. At moments, Marcus caught sight of photographs hung on the walls, gala events, charity dinners, award ceremonies. In those images, Kesha's face is close-lipped, measured, but here, in the forlorn quiet of his home, he recognized how carefully she performed her part. Now they were no longer photographs of success, but of a performance puppetry that had finally been cut. He wandered through each of these memories, feeling the weight of every lie, every unearned accolade, every act of cruelty hidden behind polite smiles. The voices of news anchors repeated behind the glass. Domestic terrorism under investigation. Files show years of surveillance using company funds. Board members confirm forced compliance. Each phrase was a hammer against the facade he'd erected. Outside, the detritus of protest continued to gather. Picket signs demanding justice, social media posts with hashtags, #sign Justice for Kesha, #sign Power and Patience, #sign Tyrant Unmasked, were viral. Every like, every share, every screenshot pushed his image further into ruins. He could feel the shift. The ground under him was unstable. The roof of his prestige was collapsing. He turned a corner and paused before a doorway leading to the closet that housed the hidden safe. A hollow silence greeted him. That was where the evidence had lived, where his control was being dismantled piece by piece. He closed his eyes briefly, and in his mind he could almost feel Kendra's presence there, steady, unrelenting, judicial. He imagined her walking through the halls of power, phone to ear, commanding a justice system he had thought would always shield him. And in that vision, for the first time, he understood that her power lay not in violence, but in clarity. She had documented everything. She had recorded him in his worst, his ugliest, his most violent. She had saved her story and in doing so, exposed his for what it was. Outside the mansion's gilded gates, cars with logos of courtroom dramas and investigative podcasts circled like vultures, and streaming news tickers blared accusations. Systemic abuse, corporate misuse, survivor-built case. He felt like a character in someone else's script, his lines rewritten in damning detail. And yet, in the emptiness of his crumbling world, there was a lesson he could no longer ignore. He had mistaken silence for submission. He had believed that as long as he controlled the narrative, he controlled everything. But he was wrong. Control without respect, without humanity, was illusion. As night fell, Marcus sat alone in a drawing room that felt sub-zero, the entire globe beyond his walls recoiling from his name. His reflection in the window looked broken, not the polished visionary he once considered himself. Instead, he saw a man delivered into reckoning by the one person he misjudged most deeply. In the distance, fireworks of protest flared, not in celebration, but in demand of justice. His name was tarnished, his fortune teetering, his freedom at risk. And behind it all, the lingering echo of Kendra's voice. "I want you to feel helpless." This was more than vengeance. It was transformation. The billionaire had become public enemy number one. But in every public condemnation, Kesha had reclaimed her power, not by fighting, but by surviving and outlasting. And Kendra ensured that survival became irrevocable truth. Sit with that image. A world that worshipped his brilliance, now watching his empire burn. Because no glitter can survive when the darkness inside is finally illuminated. And so, the billionaire who built empires lost everything. Not because a competitor outmaneuvered him, not because of a market crash, but because the woman he thought was powerless had spent 8 years building the perfect takedown. Her bruises became timestamps. Her silence became strategy. Her sister became her sword. Kesha's death wasn't the end, it was the trigger. The moment the truth surged forward and shattered every lie Marcus had wrapped around their marriage. Her life was stolen, but her legacy was unstoppable. And Kendra didn't just want justice. She wanted the world to never forget her sister's name. Marcus learned the hard way. When you beat someone into silence, you're not just hurting a person, you're fueling a revolution. And when love dies, the only thing left is the truth. And sometimes, the truth burns. To every viewer still here, let this story remind you, abuse doesn't always leave visible scars. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Justice doesn't always come through the courts. Sometimes it comes through sisters, through truth, through fire. If you're someone who has survived something similar, or know someone who has, drop A in the comments. Let others know they are not alone. If this story made you feel something, anger, hope, fire, hit the like button, share it, and make sure it reaches someone who needs to hear it. And if you ever feel trapped, remember this story. Because sometimes surviving is the first step toward changing everything. Kesha didn't get to live in the world she deserved, but her story made sure others might. And that is what real power looks like.